Very good afternoon to all of you. My dear students, today we'll interact about literature, criticism and theory. We'll be interacting about the father of literary criticism, Aristotle. But before interacting about Aristotle, I would like to tell you something very important. What is literature? You all know that literature is the mirror of society. So we'll be interacting in brief about what is literature, what is literary criticism, and what is theory. What is literature? It includes all imaginative writing, poetry, drama, fiction, or any written or printed matter on any subject. What is literature? So you now know that literature includes all imaginative writing, poetry, drama, fiction, any written or printed matter on any subject. What is literary criticism? Appreciation of any written work, liking and disliking of any art by reason, logic, and rationalizing it, understanding and interpreting literary experiences. So, my dear friends, I had been telling you, if you remember the previous classes, that now you have to learn in semantic syntax what are you speaking, when are you speaking, what you are supposed to interact, and how you are supposed to interact, and how you are supposed to talk to your parents, your teachers, and your seniors, officers, bureaucrats, and IAS officers, effective communication skills, powerful expressions, and understanding their statements and all. Because now you are not a child. Literary theory, it provides a system of which experience can be organized and made sensible. The term literature, as Raymond Williams, with whose work you may already be familiar, has reminded us, is of a comparatively recent origin. Originally, it referred to as, indeed, it still does, any written, printed matter or any subject. On any subject. We still refer to medical literature, talk about availability of otherwise of literature on a subject. Earlier it signified something similar. It is from this source that the term literate was derived sometimes in 19th century. It began connoting specifically what was earlier covered under the broad rubric of poetry. Matthew Arnold gave the final seal of its current meaning in his famous essay. Now, in its specialized use, it means what poetry used to signify in earlier times. It includes all imaginative writing, poetry, fiction, drama. The rise of notion of literature is intimately related to growth of the print industry. When texts were easily duplicated in the wake of the steam run, printing machines during the Industrial Revolution, 1750 to 1850 in Europe. Books became conditions, commodities as the capitalist market economy generated a middle class which had the leisure and literacy to read books. What is literary criticism? When someone asks you whether you like a practical book, when someone asks you whether you like a particular book, a novel, a short story, a poem, and you say yes, or you say no, you are on the threshold of literary criticism. यदि कोई आपसे पूछे कि क्या आप किसी किताब को, किसी कविता को, किसी उपन्यास को या किसी लघु कथा को आप पसंद करते हैं, अगर करते हैं हाँ या ना, अगर आप कहते हैं हाँ तो क्यों, और अगर कहते हैं ना तो क्यों. When he or she asks you why, and then you attempt an answer trying to rationalize your perception, you are doing literary criticism. What are you doing? When you are saying yes or no, and when, suppose if I ask you about my book, Flame of Life, and I ask you what about the divine intelligence poem of mine, shine, shine, O shining sun, shine left and right, shine all and shine me to work in sphere. If I ask you why do you love this poem, or why do you like this poem, you say yes, or some of you may say no. Then if I ask you why don't you love this poem, or why don't you like this poem, and then if you say give me the answer, that means you are doing literary criticism. So my dear friends, when someone asks you whether you like a particular book, a novel, a short story, and you say yes or no, you are on the threshold of literary criticism. When he or she asks you why, and then you attempt an answer trying to rationalize your perception, you are doing literary criticism. Albeit at a rudimentary level. Similarly, you do film और आर्ट क्रिटिसिज्म. जब आप किसी फिल्म को देखने के लिए जाते हैं और आपसे पूछा जाए फिल्म कैसी थी, अच्छी थी या बुरी थी, और जब आप अपने स्टेटमेंट को तार्किक दृष्टि से रीजन और लॉजिक के साथ प्रूव करते हैं, दैट मीन्स यू आर डूइंग क्रिटिसिज्म और लिटरेरी क्रिटिसिज्म ऑफ दैट वर्क. Understanding and interpreting literary experience, even when not articulated, can be literary criticism. So, what is theory? A theory provides a system by which experience can be organized, made sense of, or at least into something which will be comprehensible. Which will be comprehensible. All theories are constructed against the threat of chaos, which is the absence of system or organizing principles, to make sense of what comes to us, however provisional and imperfect that sense may have to be. That is the basis of all dogma, religious and political alike. What applies to life also applies to our experience. What applies to life also applies to our experience of works of art. How does a work of art? How does a work of art mean? What it means? How do we make sense of the work? Whether it be a literary or non-literary text. Under what condition is meaning produced? Literary theory is, as we know, it owes its origin to human attempt to deal with these issues. Where does meaning lie? In the text or in the mind of the reader? Does the author use the form of poem or a novel, an empty receptacle which he or she then fills? Impregnates like the heavenly news, dove like, as Milton says, with meaning. What effect does it produce in the mind of the reader? Does the subjectivity of the reader determine or contribute to the meaning of the work of art? literature that he or she is exposed to, or is meaning an objective reality having an ontological status? Does the reader make special attempts to get at the meaning immanent in the text? The philosophers ask similar questions about objective and absolute reality. Whether the tree that I see or touch is the reality. And you already know that judgment is most important. Milton says, illumine what in me is dark, rage and support, so that I may justify the wage of God to man. What is the justification of wage of God to man? How it is justified? So, my dear friends, we will be interacting now about this Aristotle's Poetics. But before this Aristotle Poetics, again, I would introduce you to Aristotle. His main ideas: imitation, concept of mimesis, it is worthwhile to note that unlike modern theatre, we are discussing about Aristotle's theory of tragedy. It is worthwhile to note that unlike modern theatre, ancient Greek theatre was religious. Plays were performed only during festivals, a time when society communicated with the ancestors and gods. This choice of timing influenced the nature of theatrical performances and the techniques of presentation. The Greek theatre not only grew out of dance, it also retained dance and music as major activities. The strong emotions generated while worshipping the gods and the ancestors also provided an aesthetics of emotional arousal, which we find its core, the aesthetic value of formulated. As catharsis. These dramatic festivals were often held at sites such as in the temple of Asclepios at Epidaurus, where patients were also treated for diseases. The dramatic theory in the Poetics, the one of the best book, it's published by Humphrey House. The dramatic theory in the Poetics of Aristotle can be said to consist of four principles of the ancient classificatory system. First, the concept of mimesis, which is common to all fine arts. Secondly, the treatment of various genres of poetry, namely epic, tragedy, and comedy. Thirdly, the division of tragedy into 6 elements. Number 1, plot, mythos. Number 2, character, which means ethos. Number 3, thought, dianoia. Number 4, language, lexis. Number 5, music, melopoeia. And number 6, spectacle, obsess. And fourthly, cryptic statement about catharsis upheld by Western critical tradition as a principle of Aristotelian aesthetics. The subject of mimesis can be considered in 2 ways, as a principle and as a practice. As a principle, mimesis is a kind of human urge that creates drama and is endowed with aesthetic value. As a practice, mimesis is a way of handling theatrical devices to reflect the principle. So, my dear, we know the 6 elements of a tragedy. Number 1, plot. Number 2, character. Number 3, thought. Number 4, language. Number 5, music. And number 6, spectacle. The 6 elements of tragedy are to be seen as separate only for the sake of analysis. You are the student of literature. You have to analyze. The 6 elements of tragedy are to be seen as separate only for the sake of analysis. On the stage, they form a unity again for the sake of convenience. They have been defined by Aristotle as internal and external. Plot, character, and thought are subjective, hence internal. They are not as obvious as the visual and auditory content of theatre, such as diction, music, and spectacle. Nor is it to be imagined that any one of them is more important than the other. When Aristotle called myth the soul of tragedy, it does not mean that other elements are dispensable or less essential. The myth only holds together the other elements of the play structurally. In terms of total performance, a play has a very complicated structure, which consists of all the speaking, gesturing, dancing, singing, and moving that goes on in the performing area. Yet the series of episodes or the story has been regarded as the basic structure of a play, even though it is merely the ground upon which many complex patterns are raised. Plot. What do you mean by plot? Character and ethos. Plot, mythos, and character ethos. For the ancient ethos or myth simply meant the story, commonly translated into English as plot. However, it is better to use the term myth not only as it retains the favor of the original meaning, but it also keeps us away from the confusing it with the usual meaning of the modern term plot, which implies intricate turn of events, full of surprise and suspense. As there was no convention in ancient times of writing on events of everyday life, for the serious genre of tragedy, the stories of only some famous houses could be the subject of tragedy. The story thus comes from the collective memory of the culture that created and nurtured them. As well as Aristotle has called myth the soul of tragedy. So, what is the soul of tragedy? Aristotle has called myth, plot, the soul of tragedy. To understand this, we must keep in mind the dramatic action, paraxis in ancient drama considered not so much of characterization or portrayal as was the case in the later European drama, but was an imitation, mimesis of an action made up of a series of dramatic events or episodes. Number 2, myth or plot as an organic whole. In the play, the aim was to show a passage from an earlier state of being of the protagonist to his or her later stage. This passage of episodes or actions has been called myth. The structure of this myth or plot is seen by Aristotle as an organic whole, almost like the body structure of a living animal. This is indicated in his definition of tragedy, which, like an animal's body, must have a definite shape or a magnitude. Tragedy is an imitation of an action that is complete and whole and of a certain magnitude, for there may be a whole that is wanting in magnitude. A whole is that which has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Again, a beautiful object, whether it be a living organization or any whole composed of parts, but it must also be of a certain magnitude, for beauty depends on the magnitude and order. As therefore, in the case of animate bodies and organisms, a certain magnitude is necessary, and a magnitude which may be easily embraced in the view, so in the plot, a certain length is necessary, and a length which can be easily embraced by memory. Magnitude is in itself the outer structure which is supported by the unity of action, and the whole, the structural union of the parts, being such that if any one of them is displaced or removed, the whole will be disjointed and disturbed. Aristotle, in his 8th chapter, to give the poet the liberty to create magnitude and wholeness, Aristotle allows him to make changes in the events. Thus, poetry can modify history, as it is a more philosophical and higher form than history. Poetry can modify history, as it is a more philosophical and higher form than history. Teleology, that is a unity leading to the end, make it even higher. The poet can even alter traditional legends, as he is a maker of the plots rather than of verses. The wholeness and magnitude provides unity of action to the plot. We must clearly understand, for Aristotle there is only one kind of unity, and that of action. It does not prescribe unities of time and place. These were attributed to him by the Renaissance critics. In the constructions of myth or the plot, events should follow in a manner that seems credible, having an air of design. Even in the coincidences of the myth, to heighten the effect of the tragic wonder. Two kinds of myth, simple and complex. So plot has the two types, simple plot and the complex plot. Aristotle defines two kinds of plots, the simple plot and the complex plot. The first is without reversal of fortune, peripeteia, and recognition of a past act or identity or person, anagnorosis. And the second has both. This analysis of myth is not applicable to tragedy alone, just as magnitude and unity of action should be acquired in any myth. Tragic or comic peripeteia and anagnorosis are not for tragedy. Only peripeteia can be useful in comedy too, and so can anagnorosis. Peripeteia is a change by which action veers to its opposite, subject always to the rule of probability or necessity. It creates the great ironic effect. The latter is defined as change from ignorance to knowledge, producing love or hate between the person destined by the poet to face good or bad fortune. Change from ignorance to knowledge, producing love or hate between the person destined by the poet to face good or bad fortune. On the whole, the system can be employed both for tragic and comic myths, or for the tragicomic ones like Euripides, Helen, where peripeteia and anagnorosis clearly work together towards a happy ending. Pathos or suffering.